Chapter 24 Interview. You're in the experience business. Seth Mbele, Mbhele, is a seasoned design strategist who has spent 20-plus years collaborating with corporates, startups, and nonprofits around the world in diverse design roles. He has overseen multidisciplinary delivery teams and driven design strategy at the 4 largest Pan-African players in the financial services and insurance sectors. He has led some of the largest and most ambitious transformation and omni-channel re-engineering projects on the continent of Africa. Seth formed his own agency in 2008, which he ran for a total of 10 years before he became a design strategist and consulting head at Immersion Group in 2018. He currently serves clients across EMEA as a design director at McKinsey Design. Debbie, how do you define customer centricity? Seth, an easy but difficult question. Customer centricity should be about how the organization, from a strategic perspective, is organized around serving its customers. That has multiple implications. Why should the customer be central? How are we doing things currently? How would this be different? What is the value of doing things differently? Those types of conversations come to the forefront. It should be an explicit organizational strategy around putting the current and future needs of the customers front and center. Building that relationship and ongoing value exchange with your customer for the long term. Debbie, why do so many companies seem to get it wrong or not be customer-centric? Seth, customer centricity requires a level of transformation. You have to change the way that you do things and change the way that you are organized to create, capture, and deliver value. Fundamentally change. That's where a lot of organizations get it wrong. They still have the traditional pyramid, command and control type of structure. The highest paid person makes all the decisions. A lot of people in the room who come from traditional business functions like marketing or accounting have heard buzzworthy things like design thinking and customer centricity, but don't really understand how to get it done and how to integrate it into their way of work. There are customer initiatives being done on the side without much integration back into the way that the organization functions. Things fall short. Then, typically, professionals like yourself and myself get called in, and it's nearly too late. Strategies and initiatives are already in play. They are using those traditional command and control old-school business ways. When our contribution comes about earlier, it comes in the strategy formulation itself. Debbie, we keep hearing how design thinking, courses, and certificates will make us really innovative. But it's not changing what's fundamentally going on in the organization. Hooray! We put a small bandage on a giant bleeding wound. Congratulations! You did a workshop and came up with some ideas. But you really didn't examine or change your ways of working, your corporate structure, or who holds the power. Seth, the things you mentioned speak a lot to culture. The structural underpinnings of the organization and how the company is organized have a knock-on effect on culture and the way things are done. For example, some organizations have implemented, on paper, a human-centered design approach. They have designers, they're bringing in the voice of the customer, and they're conducting interviews. But there's some missing ingredient, and it relates to the culture. We've missed the essence of what it actually means to be a customer-centric organization. Transformation, even from a technology perspective, is typically a very expensive exercise. You have to change the way you think about your business, change the way you think about value, change what behaviors are rewarded, and examine the system of capitalism that prioritizes short-term profits and shareholder value. Those are the things that can make a customer-centric push and real ground-up change a bit difficult. I think that's one of the reasons why companies do the cosmetic stuff. They want to be seen doing the right things, making the right noises, and designing by committee. But you've put a little layer of icing on a poo cake. Most of my professional consulting work in the design space has largely been in financial services focused on South Africa and the continent. The ideas fundamentally still come from the business who says, these are the things that we want to do. For example, they want to do a financial education program largely because the state requires them to have a financial education program. They'll put someone in charge of it who isn't empowered or incentivized. You get experts in a room to put the solution together. At the end, someone will call in some designers and say, make this look pretty and speak to some customers. Debbie, what would it take to make people at executive and decision-making levels more interested in customers' experiences? Seth, I've been a designer for 20-something years, but in different sorts of guises, from a web designer to designing experiences specific to restaurants and theme parks. In the food and beverage industry, you get an immediacy of seeing the thing that you've created, the whole offering, the burger, chips, music, waiters, setting, ambiance, etc. You see the entire experience, and you see, in real time, what good and bad experiences look and feel like. You also feel it financially. A partner, owner, or executive in these establishments sees in real time how a bad experience is costly on the bottom line and how a great experience creates loyalty and drives more spending. Some types of businesses naturally understand and get it. They are in the experience business. Most, if not all, retail businesses deliver an experience. You walk into a shoe shop, you smell the leather, you see the lighting, the cabinetry, and the person that's helping you. There's an experience that has been orchestrated toward a certain outcome. The CEOs and the executive layer don't get out of the building enough. This is going to be harsh, but they don't really understand the business that they are in. If you are a telco executive thinking, we can throw a Netflix subscription here or there, I think you've got the wrong idea. What does our product enable? What is our customer actually doing with our stuff? Who are they calling? Why is it important? How are they consuming data? That's where the real nuggets, the insights, and the real market differentiation come from. Think of someone at the executive level running the organization through spreadsheets and dashboards without understanding why things are happening. They may understand the what and that sales are up or down, but they don't understand the why. Debbie, people can go to the shoe shop, watch how the workers treat people, and watch the experience that customers have. People can go to the theme park, watch how the employees treat people, taste the food, and check the experience. But when it comes to digital, so many executives and leaders are not watching the videos of the research that's taking place. They're not exposed to what those digital experiences look like from the customer's perspectives. Seth, correct. This is part of the disjointed nature of certain organizations. The one main advantage of a digital business is that everything is infinitely trackable. Of all of the organizations that I've worked or consulted with, I don't think that I found one that properly leverages the data that they collect, or they don't even know what they are collecting. The analytics haven't been set up in a way that is useful or usable. But you've got mountains and mountains of data, lakes, puddles, and pools of data, and all of this machine learning stuff going on. It's still very much that siloed mentality where you've got these pockets of excellence and pockets of data and expertise, but it's just not coming together. Data is a type of representation of your customer and their behavior. That should be critical stuff that you look at all the time, but it's hardly ever leveraged in that way. Debbie, I'm also finding that some executives, even CEOs, who, when they receive data that is bad news, like angry tweets or survey comments from unhappy customers, they write that off and say, "Those are mean, deeply bad people," or "they're just complainers." Seth, that's typical. Part of the fundamental transformation that I was talking about earlier is changing what are we tracking and why. How are we incentivizing staff and customers? Are we incentivizing certain behaviors towards certain outcomes? We talk about NPS all the time. It's vague. Organizations tend to leave it at very high diagnostic metrics, and it almost becomes conjecture. These metrics are pointing you in a certain direction, saying, you need to do some work over there. If you've got a well-structured survey and it starts giving you a trend of negative sentiment, it's probably something to look at. That's the type of data that should be given to a customer experience team. They should have the autonomy to decide what to do with that feedback and how we fix things. This is also where a CEO or manager should not be looking at that data and making any type of decision. They should be deferring that to a CX team and saying, "Hey, I remember that we spoke about NPS, and we're getting a consistent score of 6. You told me that's not good. Who in the organization can tell us what this means?" You need to be open to saying, "I know this part of the puzzle, but I need different people to come in and help me figure out the rest." That comes with changes at a personal level, interpersonal level, organizational level, etc. Ego needs to come out of the equation. Debbie, I wanted to talk about what's going on in Africa because during the time when I worked with you, I was really surprised how many African organizations seemed to be working on spinning up customer experience initiatives. They were very interested in CX strategies and the North Star. It seemed like Africa was getting it when other regions weren't getting it yet. Seth, are we getting it? Yeah, in pockets. I did a lot of work in financial services, banks, and insurance houses. Within 18 months, I worked on 5 or 6 major initiatives or concepts. None of them saw the light of day. The reason is that you've got this center of excellence type model where things are happening next to the organization, almost not in the organization. We may be in the same building, but it's not connected. There's no real understanding unless you've got organizations with quite a flat structure and really empowered leadership. We get it, but unfortunately, it falls victim to that traditional corporate structure where we incentivize the wrong things. We might do something shiny for a board presentation for this quarter, but when it comes down to getting that initiative funded, there are issues. There's a disconnect in understanding the value. Why is this initiative being prioritized over business as usual? There's always that disconnect in terms of trying to create the center of excellence model that is in agile or fake agile. It's where things fall flat. You've got very well-meaning, forward-thinking professionals in South Africa, but we very often end up against the wall. Budgets have been slashed for reasons you don't understand. Things have been half implemented. There's natural movement of people across, in, and out of the organization. As much as we get it, we probably are still a little bit behind in terms of implementation. Debbie, if you think about the products, services, and experiences that you interact with in your life, can you think of one that is doing a good job with customer centricity? Seth, in South Africa, probably no. This could be a very unique South African thing. South Africa has its problems. We've had the highest rates of inequality in the world for many years. For probably close to 20 years, we've been the country with the dubious title of topping the Gini coefficient. a statistic measuring income and wealth inequality. It means that we've got very specific problems with poverty and race. The wealth distribution in South Africa is still largely along racial lines. There's what typical companies do, which is this aspirational Western lens of how to do business, how to deliver value, and how to create products and services. The Western lens is not necessarily appropriate for the types of specific problems that we are dealing with on socioeconomic and cultural levels. Solutions and approaches are not necessarily appropriate. Here is a banking example. One of the South African banks was working on their financial education initiatives. We had quite a wide research phase and conducted a lot of interviews with customers and potential customers. A poor person would probably be the beneficiary of the bank's financial education. We expected them to travel on public transportation, which is scandalous and dangerous in this country, plus also expensive, just to get to an interview center somewhere. They were being addressed by people with no cultural context of where they come from. There's no real depth of understanding of what it actually means to be poor in South Africa. In South Africa, the profile of the typical designer is a white male, maybe white female. You've got a good sprinkling of Black designers that are coming up now, but there's that disconnect because of the type of society that we've created, a cultural disconnect between the experts that are architecting the experience versus the people that are actually using or are the beneficiaries of the product or service. There are disconnects in language and cultural context and in understanding what is their life like. You're speaking to someone about their financial habits, how they spend money, and how they save money. So I asked one of the designers, would you be comfortable to take this questionnaire that you've created, that you intend to ask the participants about their financial habits, to Stellenbosch, which is an affluent, white, predominantly Afrikaans area? Would you be comfortable to go and ask those people these questions? He said, I'm not so sure. That's the problem. We've got a lack of sensitivity and integration across the races. There's a lot of really shoddy design work, if I can call it that, which is happening because of that untransformed nature of our segregated society. I'm doing a lot of work across the continent. When I'm in Ghana, Nigeria, or Kenya, I always insist on having a local person in the room. There are certain parts of the conversation that will probably happen in English as a business transactional language, but it's really important to have a colleague that is able to do the cultural translation. Debbie, but we keep hearing, just have empathy, just create empathy. Seth, I don't even understand what people mean when they talk about empathy. This is where things like diversity and inclusion really matter, especially in a context such as ours, where you've got these very strange structural and cultural differences. Having a Black designer in the room really matters. Having Black design leadership really matters in this country. We're not necessarily seeing it. We're not necessarily getting there. They might feel the same way in the LGBT community. This is why it's really important to have diversity in the team itself. You need to have that community-level voice. The structure of your team needs to reflect the community that you're designing for. It starts there, and then we can talk about empathy, whatever that might mean today or next week. Debbie, this reminds me of an interesting experiment we ran at my company. When research participants booked interviews with us, they could choose from me or Larry with our photos shown. We're both white, so there wasn't a rainbow of choices. But you could choose me, Larry, or pick your slot by time and the system will assign you a person. We found that every time we did this, including one study where we scheduled 80 people, roughly 50% chose to book by time. 50% chose either Larry or me deliberately. One of the female participants I spoke to said, "I chose you because I got the feeling you would understand me." If we extrapolate that out, what could it mean to our research participants to be able to choose a Black researcher or researchers from different communities? What about the people who are more comfortable talking to someone who looks like them? Seth, yeah, 100%. Going back to the South African example, I've run interviews with participants that have literally ended in tears. We got to some really fundamental fundamentals within the interview, off script. But we got to that point, firstly, by not speaking English. English is a fourth or fifth language for most people in South Africa. For me, it's a third language. English is mostly administrative and transactional. South Africa is 90% Black African with a first language that is definitely not English. Even the language is problematic if you tried to do that type of research. You are asking people to filter their responses through a couple of filters as soon as you speak English. You just get into a different mode of thinking. It's the same with traveling to interview with us. We want to create an environment for our participants that is comfortable. We are in an office building with aircon and coffee machines, but that could be intimidating for someone that is coming from an informal settlement. It could affect what they share and how they share. You do a quick 30 seconds of icebreakers, you think you've got rapport, and you jump into the interview, but so much was left on the table. It's unsaid, and it will never be said because you can't access that stuff. I'm sure there's stuff that I could never access from a non-binary person because I'm clearly binary presenting. This is why diversity, equity, and inclusion are really important at the level of the team doing the work. Debbie, this really shines a fresh spotlight on the old "anybody can talk to customers." Our engineers and product managers will ask our customers a few questions. That sounds easy to do, but it sounds like it's missing, I don't know if gravitas is the right word, but respect. It points at the importance of that specialized researcher who really knows how to conduct those sessions. Seth, absolutely. Other roles often come into the room and are very myopic. They want feedback about how great we are. They want to validate their own thinking and leave. Do they even know how to receive or tease out potentially unflattering feedback, or the fact that they are probably barking up the wrong tree? They are the proverbial hammer looking for a nail. We need a research phase, but for many, it's a box-ticking exercise. Debbie, what is the number one thing listeners need to look at changing to be more customer-centric? Seth, a shift in paradigm, even if we're not able to do the structural things like reorganize the organization. At the very least, the thinking needs to change. There needs to be a real shift in understanding why customer centricity matters, understanding how to achieve customer centricity, understanding the value of research and design, and really bringing those people into conversations early before we have a predefined hypothesis or even solution. Let the professionals do their work. I've never seen someone telling an accountant how to balance their spreadsheet. It's unheard of. I would not walk in and say, "Hey, I've done a trial balance before. I can do this. I'll take this from here." On what planet is that happening? Even when we are including each other, and I show you one or two tips, tricks, methods, or techniques here and there, that doesn't make you qualified to do the work.